The ballroom was soaked in gold, from the towering chandeliers that shimmered above like inverted crowns to the brass-railed balconies that overlooked the carefully choreographed evening below. Every corner of the Metropolitan Heritage Hotel had been transformed for the gala. Velvet-draped tables arranged like chess pieces across the marble floor, a jazz quartet tucked into a corner playing Cole Porter standards, and a silent auction display filled with items no one truly needed but everyone wanted to be seen bidding on. The event was invitation only, exclusive, elite, the kind of night where legacies were reinforced and reputations shaped by who you spoke to and who you were seen with. It was also the kind of night where the invisible were expected to stay invisible. Jasmine Ellis, 28, glided between tables in polished black shoes that didn't make a sound. Her server's uniform was flawless: black vest, crisp white shirt, fitted slacks, and her tightly coiled hair was neatly pinned up. Her tray never wobbled, her expression never broke. She moved like water, unseen by those who floated above her, but essential to keeping everything clean, moving, civilized. She was used to it. She had served at enough corporate fundraisers, board dinners, and political galas to know exactly how to disappear while standing right in front of someone. But this night would be different. At table 14, near the front of the ballroom and a few paces from the podium, sat Victoria Langston, heiress, socialite, and the kind of woman who used the phrase self-made while sipping champagne purchased with old money. Her hair was platinum, lips cherry red, and her laugh, loud, nasal, and unkind, could pierce glass. Victoria lounged in her seat, surrounded by acquaintances who clung to her presence like expensive perfume. She wore a silk crimson gown that bared one shoulder and sparkled with tiny crystals. Her diamond earrings caught every light. But nothing sparkled more than the superiority in her eyes. As Jasmine approached, tray balanced effortlessly in one hand. Victoria turned, glanced up, and offered a smirk dripping with condescension. "Well," she said loud enough for the table to hear, "didn't know the help came with cheekbones like that." Her friends tittered. Jasmine paused only for a moment, just long enough to register the comment, before smoothly setting down a fresh glass of sparkling water. "Would you prefer red or white wine this evening, ma'am?" Jasmine asked, her tone perfectly neutral, but her eyes sharp. Victoria took the wine list from the table, held it up, then let it flutter back down like a leaf. "Surprise me. I like to be challenged," laughter again. A bit louder this time. One woman at the table, wearing a silver shawl, looked uncomfortable but said nothing. A man beside her whispered something in Victoria's ear, and she laughed again, louder still, relishing the attention. Jasmine simply nodded, turned, and walked toward the bar, her back straight, her chin high. She was used to nights like this, used to laughter that wasn't meant to be funny, used to being measured, sized up, dismissed. But that didn't mean she didn't feel it. She just knew how to wear armor no one could see. Across the ballroom, other servers moved like shadows, silent and precise. But none of them carried themselves quite like Jasmine. Not just with grace, but with something heavier, like she had nothing to prove, and yet everything to hold back. At the bar, she requested a glass of white Bordeaux with subtle acidity, just bold enough to be ironic. The bartender, a young man named Chris who had worked with Jasmine before, raised an eyebrow. "For Langston?" Jasmine smiled faintly. "She asked to be surprised." He smirked. "Good luck." She returned with the wine and served it with the same quiet dignity as before. Victoria barely acknowledged her this time. The table had already moved on, gossiping about someone's divorce, another woman's facelift, a senator's affair that hadn't yet hit the press. But one man at the next table over, an older gentleman in a navy suit with a gold pin on his lapel, had been watching. Not in the way Victoria did, not with scrutiny or ownership, with curiosity. He didn't say anything. Not yet. But Jasmine noticed. She always did. The gala unfolded like a well-rehearsed play, orchestra rising, glasses clinking, and egos gently colliding under the guise of polite conversation. But beneath the glitter, the buzz of whispers and curiosity began to ripple. Not about the celebrity couple near the entrance, not about the tech CEO making a rare appearance, but about her, the waitress, Jasmine. Most still didn't know her name, but they had seen the exchange at Victoria's table. seen the way the young woman didn't shrink, didn't fumble. Something about her, the way she carried herself, the way she looked directly into Victoria's eyes without apology, unsettled people in a way they couldn't quite explain. At the nearby table 15, Charles Bennett, a tall, dignified man in his 70s, leaned toward his companion, a retired ambassador named Evelyn Hart. "Did you see that?" he asked softly, nodding toward Jasmine as she floated between tables. Evelyn adjusted her glasses. "That the waitress?" "She's no waitress," Charles said. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "Explain." Charles sipped his drink, studying Jasmine's movements. "That's military posture. Or maybe academic. Her eyes don't scan the room like someone waiting for direction." She analyzed as Evelyn narrowed her gaze. "She looks young. So did Condoleezza when I met her." Evelyn chuckled but kept watching. Jasmine was now politely helping an elderly guest up from a chair, gently steadying him before continuing on without fanfare. At table 14, Victoria hadn't noticed any of this. She was too busy recounting her spa trip to Switzerland and ignoring the people who had stopped laughing at her jokes. But Jasmine noticed everything. She always had. And she had seen Charles watching her, not with suspicion, but with the kind of look that said, "I remember people like you." She didn't flinch. Instead, she moved back toward the catering station near the back corner of the ballroom. She needed air, or at least a moment alone behind the velvet partition before dessert service began. But she didn't make it. As she turned the corner, a voice stopped her. "You handled that beautifully." It was Charles. He stood with perfect posture, hands clasped in front of him, the kind of man who had shaken hands with presidents, but knew when to speak softly. Jasmine tilted her head, curious but guarded. "Unhandled what, sir?" she asked calmly. He smiled. "The venom dipped in sugar." A pause. Then, Jasmine gave a single breath of laughter, not amused, but appreciative. "I've had practice," she said. "I'm sure you have," he replied. "But I suspect you've done far more than serve wine to women who wear privilege like perfume." She said nothing. He continued, "Forgive me for asking, but what's your last name?" Her eyes narrowed slightly, not out of suspicion, but calculation. "Ellis." He nodded slowly, as if confirming something. "Dr. Jasmine Ellis?" Silence, then. "I suppose there's no point in hiding anymore." Charles smiled wider. "I read your policy paper on education reform in sub-Saharan Africa. Last year. Harvard Law Review." Jasmine sighed. "That paper wasn't meant for galas like this. And I wasn't meant to be recognized tonight." "You're not here for the paycheck, are you?" She shook her head. "I'm here to watch them. Study them. See how they act when they think I'm not one of them." Charles chuckled. "That's bold. Dangerous, even." "I'm writing something," she said. "A book. On power. And perception. And what it means to be underestimated in a room full of people who claim to care about justice." He looked at her, a new respect blooming in his expression. "You're playing chess," he said. Jasmine smiled faintly. "Always." As she turned to return to her role, Charles said softly, "When the time comes, you'll know when to let them see who you really are." She paused. "I'm starting to think that moment is getting closer." The clock ticked toward 9 p.m., and the gala's energy began to swell into its second act. Dessert was being served. Spoons tapped against porcelain plates as guests indulged in tiny chocolate soufflés that cost more than most people made in a day. A live saxophone solo filled the air, silky and slow, trying to smooth over the underlying tension that had started to hum beneath the glittering surface. But the buzz wasn't about politics or stocks or who donated the most during the silent auction. It was about her, the server, the woman with the posture of a leader and the eyes of someone who had nothing to prove. People whispered, quietly at first, "She doesn't act like the others." "Did you see how she responded to Victoria?" "Someone said she has a PhD. No, that can't be. She's in uniform. Are we sure she's even staff?" It wasn't just curiosity, it was discomfort. Jasmine's presence challenged the carefully staged hierarchy of the room. She didn't play the role they expected. She didn't flinch, didn't shrink, and, most unforgivably, she didn't seem to care what anyone thought. At table 14, Victoria had started to notice. It wasn't just the change in mood. It was the way the energy around her had shifted. People weren't laughing at her quips anymore. Some avoided her gaze altogether. One of her friends even muttered something about her comment earlier being a little much. Victoria leaned in toward the woman beside her and whispered, "Who is she?" The woman blinked. "Who?" "That waitress." The woman hesitated. "Someone said she's not just a waitress, that she's some kind of professor?" Victoria laughed. "Please, that girl's been filling water glasses for the last hour." But her voice was tighter now, less confident. Across the ballroom, Jasmine was speaking with a guest, a former UN envoy, in low, fluid French. He had asked for an extra fork, and she had responded with a subtle correction to his pronunciation of a word. They shared a short, respectful exchange. Then, he watched her walk away with a look of dawning realization. Moments later, he stood up and made his way toward the back of the room, toward Charles Bennett. The whispers spread faster now. The illusion that Jasmine was just the help had fractured. There was something more happening beneath the surface, something some guests were starting to suspect, and others were desperate to deny. And Jasmine? She remained composed, steady, moving from table to table with a kind of quiet thunder beneath every step. She knew what was happening. She had planned for it. Her goal was never to embarrass anyone, never to provoke or expose for the sake of drama. It was deeper than that. She wanted them to see, truly see, the blind spots in their own minds. And she had nearly succeeded. But one last piece remained. One final reveal. And it would come sooner than anyone expected. The gala's host stepped up to the podium. He tapped the microphone once, smiled politely, and gestured for the jazz quartet to fade out. The room dimmed just slightly, not dramatically, just enough to pull attention toward the stage and away from whispered conversations. "Ladies and gentlemen," the host began, "thank you for your generosity this evening. As you know, this annual gala supports educational equity initiatives across underserved communities in America and abroad. Every year, we honor someone whose work in this space has been groundbreaking, transformative, and this year is no different." There was a light rustle of anticipation. Forks clinked against plates, chairs shifted. Several heads turned toward the entrance, expecting some prominent academic or public figure to emerge from the shadows and accept the award. Victoria Langston leaned over to whisper smugly, "Hopefully they keep this short." The host continued, eyes scanning the crowd. "Our honoree tonight is not only a renowned policy strategist and educator, but also an advocate for systemic reform and equity. Her research has been cited in legal reviews, UN briefs, and multiple think tanks focused on dismantling structural bias in education." The room began to buzz again. Her most recent work, Invisible Frames, Rethinking Power and Access in American Institutions, has become a cornerstone in conversations about race, class, and opportunity. Somewhere in the crowd, a glass slipped from someone's hand and shattered on the floor. But the host didn't flinch. He smiled and said clearly, "Please join me in welcoming tonight's honoree, Dr. Jasmine Ellis." Silence. Total, suffocating silence. Then, the click of heels. Jasmine stepped out from behind the velvet partition, no longer in her serving uniform. She wore a sleek black suit, tailored perfectly to her figure, with a simple gold pendant at her neck. Her hair was down now, soft curls framing her face, confident and radiant. She walked with poise, the kind that silenced a room not by demand, but by gravity. Every eye turned. Some widened in recognition, others in disbelief. Victoria Langston froze, the blood draining from her face. The waitress, the one she had mocked, the one she had laughed at, was now walking onto the stage as the evening's guest of honor. Whispers rippled through the room like shockwaves. A few people applauded instinctively, others hesitated, caught between awe and shame. Jasmine reached the podium and turned to face the crowd. She didn't smile. She waited until the room was absolutely still. Then she spoke. "I've spent my career studying power, watching how it shifts in rooms like this. Who holds it, who assumes it, and who's never invited to the table unless they're wearing a uniform with someone else's name on the tag. A few people looked down. But tonight, I didn't come to talk about theory. I came to give you a glimpse of reality, of what it feels like to be seen, but never truly recognized. Spoken to, but never spoken with. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Tonight, some of you saw me carrying trays, and you saw only what you expected to see. Others noticed something more. Some even asked questions. She looked directly at Victoria's table, and a few didn't ask anything at all. The silence was absolute now. No one moved. I am Dr. Jasmine Ellis, she said, and I do not need a podium or a title or applause to prove that. But tonight, I wanted you to see what it looks like when the walls we build between us collapse. And with that, she stepped back. No dramatic bow, no smug grin. Just a woman standing fully in her power, unapologetic, unshaken, undeniable. Then the room finally erupted. Applause, loud and rising, poured through the ballroom. Not polite, not performative. Real. For a few long seconds, the applause didn't just fill the ballroom. It shook it. People who minutes earlier had been casually sipping wine and speculating about stock portfolios were now on their feet. Some clapped with rising awe, others with a stunned kind of urgency, as if trying to apologize through their palms. But not everyone. Victoria Langston sat frozen in her chair, her hands resting lightly on her lap like porcelain, too stiff to move, too aware to look up. The color had drained from her face, leaving only a faint pink in her cheeks, which deepened the longer the applause continued. Her friends at the table shifted uncomfortably. One of them, the woman in the silver shawl, quietly pushed her chair back and stood up to clap. Another followed, then another. Soon, the entire table stood. Except Victoria. She stared blankly at the podium, where Jasmine now stood off to the side, exchanging a quiet word with the host. Her composure was still perfect, her face calm. But her presence had changed. No longer someone people looked through, but someone they couldn't look away from. People began to whisper again, but this time, not about who she was. Now, they knew. The new questions were, what else did I miss? How many times have I done what Victoria did, and no one called it out? What would I have said to her tonight if I hadn't known? And more personally, what does that say about me? Back at table 15, Charles Bennett stood with a soft smile on his face. He wasn't clapping for show. He had known, or at least suspected, from the moment he saw Jasmine move. But now, watching the room shift, he nodded quietly to himself. Good, he murmured. Let them sit in it. He glanced toward Victoria, who was now visibly tense. Her hand had crept toward her wine glass, but she didn't lift it. Her fingers just rested there, gripping the stem like a lifeline. Finally, as the applause began to settle, the gala's host returned to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Ellis has graciously agreed to stay for questions and conversations after dinner. I hope many of you will take the opportunity, not just to speak, but to listen. That last word hung in the air like a challenge. People began to sit again. Servers moved through the room with dessert refills and coffee, but this time they were noticed, thanked, looked in the eye. The energy had shifted. When Jasmine returned to the ballroom floor, no longer in uniform but now wearing her title openly, people didn't avert their eyes. They made space. Guests approached her, not with the stiff politeness reserved for service staff, but with humility, even reverence. A philanthropist asked about her book. A professor asked to cite her in a lecture. A young woman, another black server working the event, looked at her like she was watching the future walk past. Jasmine greeted them all with grace, but she didn't linger. Not yet. Because across the room, Victoria was still seated, her eyes locked on her half-empty glass, her pride collapsing under the weight of her silence. Jasmine walked toward her, slowly, deliberately, not to confront her, but to offer something rarer, a chance. When she arrived at the table, the air tightened. Victoria looked up, reluctantly. Their eyes met. Jasmine said nothing. She didn't need to. Victoria swallowed. Her voice, when it came, was small. I didn't know. Jasmine nodded, her voice low but firm. You didn't ask. Then, without anger, without gloating, she simply turned and walked away, leaving Victoria to face herself. The ballroom never fully regained its earlier rhythm. Yes, the music resumed, softer now, more restrained. And yes, the lights glowed gently over half-finished desserts and untouched champagne. But the air had changed. Something deeper had settled over the room, like the residue of a truth too powerful to ignore. Jasmine stood by the edge of the room, away from the spotlight, sipping water as a stream of people slowly formed. Not a crowd, but a procession. They didn't come for photos. They came to talk. A young couple, educators from Chicago, approached first. The woman clutched her napkin like a handkerchief, clearly moved. "I teach 10th grade literature," she said. "Tonight reminded me why I do it." "Thank you." Jasmine nodded. "Then your students are already ahead." Next came a foundation director who had once denied her grant proposal. He apologized quietly, his tone different from the performative apologies Jasmine had grown used to. This one sounded wounded by his own blindness. "I read your application," he admitted, "but I didn't really see it." "I'm sorry," Jasmine didn't reply with bitterness. She simply said, "Try again." One by one, people came forward, asking questions, admitting things, stumbling through awkward compliments and quiet revelations. But the most meaningful moment came not from a donor or CEO. It came from a girl in a black apron, barely 19. One of the servers who had watched the entire night unfold while carrying dishes no one ever thanked her for. She approached Jasmine near the service entrance, eyes wide, hands trembling slightly. "Dr. Ellis," she said, voice barely above a whisper, "I've been working these events for 2 years, and this is the first time I saw someone who looked like me stand up there." Jasmine turned to her fully, giving her the kind of focus she had been denied all night. "You belong up there too," she said softly. The girl blinked. "But I'm just—" "Don't finish that sentence." Jasmine stepped closer. "Because one day, someone will try to finish it for you. And they'll be wrong." The girl smiled, tears forming. "Thank you." Jasmine touched her shoulder gently. "I meant what I said tonight. We are not invisible. We've just been taught to believe we should be." From across the room, Charles Bennett watched all of it unfold. The scholar, the activist, the servant, the leader, all woven into this one extraordinary woman, standing calmly in the eye of the cultural storm she had created. He stepped forward one last time. "Will you speak at Columbia?" he asked, half joking. "They could use a shake-up." Jasmine grinned. "Only if you sit in the front row." They shook hands. 2 generations. One cause. As the guests began to leave, most quieter than they had arrived, Jasmine stayed behind. She helped gather napkins. She thanked the kitchen staff by name. She even returned a wine glass to the cart, not because she had to, but because she still believed in never asking others to do what she wouldn't do herself. That's who she was. Still Jasmine, still Ellis. But now seen. The gala was over. The glitter had dulled. Tables sat empty, littered with name cards and coffee cups. Staff swept quietly around the room, and the hum of chatter had long since faded into the night. But Jasmine remained, not because she had to, because she chose to. She stood at the edge of the ballroom, looking out over the now silent space, the place where an entire room of people had finally seen her, not as a server, not as a spectacle, not even as a surprise twist, but as herself. She pulled her coat over her shoulders slowly with care. The fabric was plain, dark gray wool, not designer, but on her it looked regal. Just as she turned to leave, footsteps echoed behind her. It was Victoria Langston. No entourage now, no wine glass. Just her, hair loosened slightly, her makeup faded with the hours, and a rawness in her expression that hadn't been there before. "I didn't want to leave without saying something," Victoria said, her voice uncertain. Jasmine turned slowly. "You already said enough." Victoria winced. "I know, and I was wrong." A pause. She swallowed hard. "You didn't deserve that. Any of it. And I think maybe I needed to be embarrassed like that. Publicly. Maybe that's the only way people like me change." Jasmine didn't offer easy forgiveness. She didn't nod with pity, but her voice was steady. You saw a black woman with a tray, she said. And you assumed you knew her story? Victoria nodded. I did. And now? Jasmine asked. Victoria took a breath. Now I know how little I actually see. Silence. Then Jasmine said, not unkindly, then start seeing. That's the work, Victoria nodded. I will. And just like that, Jasmine turned and walked away. No handshake, no final zinger. Because she didn't need validation. She had her power. Outside, the city breathed quietly. The air was crisp, the streets still. Jasmine walked to the curb and unlocked her car, a modest black sedan. She sat behind the wheel for a moment, then pulled out a small leather notebook from her bag. On the front cover, a gold-embossed title, The Hidden Room. She opened it to a blank page and began to write, Tonight I wore silence like armor, and when they laughed I stayed still, because I knew truth would speak louder than defense. She paused. Let them remember. Let them wonder. Let them tell the story, and ask themselves where they were standing when the room turned. She smiled softly to herself, then closed the notebook, started the engine, and pulled out into the sleeping city, not just as Dr. Jasmine Ellis, but as a new beginning.